I'm Tony Ruiz of Gold Derby here with David Schwartz, the Emmy-nominated composer behind the documentary Lucy and Desi. And David, we'll get into the Emmys in just a few minutes, but people associate scores, I think, a lot of times incorrectly with just narrative filmmaking, fiction, that sort of thing. They don't often associate it with documentary filmmaking, and yet I think it's just as important of an element. Is there a specific difference you see in the role of music in a documentary versus standard narrative fare?
Certainly can be. I haven't done that many docs, amazingly. I did Alex Gibney's Hunter Thompson one, which was great, and that was sort of, he said, just go rock and roll, be like the music he loved, be like the Rolling Stones, be like Moby Grape, and so that's a different one. And, as I worked on this doc, Lucy and Desi, I realized it was more like a film, a scripted film. Just the music had drama, it had comedy. It just felt like it was a narrative story, and it had big themes. So that was really fun. I haven't done the other kind of doc musically, but I'd like to. And I'm sure I've done that kind of music for other things, docs within the shows that I've done. But yeah, they can be very different. And, there's different styles and all electronic ones. And when I got hired, I was asked to do an orchestral score, and that's what we did in the end. And it had to be a small orchestra, but it really paid off. It was so great, and that's always the most fun. And go ahead.
Yeah, why an orchestral score? What was the thinking behind that?
I think it was the drama. I got the video while Amy was in Europe doing something, and I started writing, and we only had one meeting during the process, and it was really funny. It was the only time I had been out since COVID had started, and it was at a big office building in Beverly Hills. And, I just hadn't been out, so I got there really early, and I was hanging out with the editor, who's incredible. And Amy couldn't get up the stairs. The elevators had broken. And she kept saying, well, I'm trying to go up the stairs because it's on the third floor, but the owner of the building's here and he won't let me go. It was very much like a Lucy episode, that she could not get to the office that we were in. So by the time she snuck past, I don't know if she snuck past, but she got up the stairs somehow. Lucy would have scaled the outside of the building, but that's, a different episode. We had, I think, an hour and a half out of a 4-hour meeting, and that was the only time we met in purpose. But, I played her, and she really liked the stuff I did, but I could tell sometimes you can play for a director, and you go like, they're saying they like it. I said, but what about this? Do you really like this? What would you like it to be more? And it was just coming out from she wanted more drama and more tension. She wanted that side. The comedy came because it was Lucy and Desi. It's comedy gold. Really didn't have to do much with that. Just stay out of their way because they're going to get people smiling and laughing. And the love themes were big, and the tension was big. And it sort of all comes together throughout the movie. It was probably as close to a classical scoring job. I don't mean like classical music, but like what people think of as scoring that I've ever done. Because I'm usually on the outer fringes of things, which I like. And I may go through a whole career without ever doing a doctor show. I'm not hoping. If someone gave me a doctor show, I'd be glad to take it, or a lawyer show. I've done pilots, but none that, so maybe I'm the wrong person to hire for a doctor show. I'll put that out there.
So it sounds to me like your approach to this was very similar to any other job that you take. Would that be accurate?
Totally. It's a story, and I want to help the story as much as I can and support it and maybe take it to some new places. Now, that said, the results are very different. I think Arrested Development is a story in The Good Place, or, 2 other shows that I've done. And they're, it comes out different. People will hear something new that I do and they say, oh, that sounded like you. And I don't see how they see it because I think, oh, I've gone totally, but there must be something that's, organic to me that stays in it, which is nice. That's what you hope for. So.
People think Lucy and Desi, they think, comedy, the more tragic elements are not maybe the first thing that come to people's minds. So with that in mind, how did you go about trying to, kind of have the music reflect the different levels of the film?
Boy, I think, the film was a great aid for me and Amy. And, it just sort of came out of it. You know, we started out with her beginning, which was poor, and she grew up in poverty in upstate New York, and there was a couple of tragedies that really shaped her life and made her want to support her own family. So I think that was there, and then, you know, at some point we start interspersing it with clips from the show, and you know, I mean, it's so easy because anyone who's seen the show loves it. You know, I think more than anything you could think of. And then when you find the story behind it, there's a lot of drama in there. Their relationship was, you know, a true great love story, and we didn't want to say that without saying the other side of it, that they didn't last, you know, that there was stress, that he had problems, that she had problems. There was sort of a role reversal because, you know, she was really, they were a really great couple working together, but, you know, certainly after Desi left, she was running the studio. She was, you know, hiring everybody, which she really missed him during that period. This is later on in the film, but she realized what a great producer he was and an innovator they both were. You know, their innovations are, it's sort of like the history of television, you know.
Does it guide your process when you know that, like, for example, there's these really specific sections of the film for me. You know, one of my favorites as an old movie nerd is kind of Lucy's, you know, coming up through the studio system, and you know, you see all of her, you know, jobs in some of these so-called B movies, but she's with Ginger Rogers and things like that. Does that make the creation process easier when you know you've got these kind of eras associated with different parts of the film?
That's an excellent question. Yes, I mean, it's great. And it was just, oh, wow, she did that with him. And she did, you know, she was really working her way up, but working with the top people of those days. And you know, I mean, the first thing is, well, you know, let's go, here's Hollywood kind of music. And there's certain, you know, sound to that, certainly in the 30s and the 40s, which I love. And I wanted a little bit of that, but I didn't want it to become a parody of that. And I think Amy felt the same way. So if it got too much that way, she said, let's, you know, take a little bit of the comedy out and just let it be. She was very confident in her material. And yeah, I can only go back to Amy with each question because she's very inspiring.
Well, but I think you bring up a good point, is, you know, particularly in the section about the show, where the show is kind of, you know, centerpiece, and that show had such a distinctive musical sound. You know, you could pick out the I Love Lucy music from anything.
Right.
So how did you was that a conscious choice on your part to, let's say, I don't want to kind of like mimic this. I want to do something different and still maintain the spirit of it?
Yeah, also a good question. I think that's where I come in, and I'm not saying if I'm not a good copyist. It comes out, you know, sometimes I'll be worried and I'll go back and listen to the original source. I go, that's nothing like that, or it's just an homage. And I didn't actively listen to the score within the episodes. Of course, you can't get away from the main title, and it's played in its original version. And there was some discussion with some of the other producers, oh, let's redo the theme and do it a little more modern. And, you know, I secretly hoped that request would go away, and it did. I didn't say, no, let's not do that. But it was intimidating. And, you know, I knew I could do something great and modern and make it different. But changing it doesn't always make it better. That was my feeling at the time, and we ended up not doing that. And there's a couple of times, one that's very noticeable, where we really went Latin when they meet each other. And it actually replaced a Cuban woman singer's version of Fever. And that wasn't usable in the end. And I got to write a rumba there and use the jazz musicians. And that was really fun. And yet that scene in particular, probably things had to be moved around. There were more notes about, oh, like, well, here it should swell, but here, let's wait here until, you know, they're really together, and then you can swoon there and the strings come in, and very, very particular kind of notes, which wasn't often the case. It existed in other cues. I mean, everything does now. You know, people are very sophisticated, and, you know, they've been dealing with temp for a long time. And so, you know, everything influences it in the end. But I was very happy with the results, and hopefully they are.
I have to admit that one of my favorite parts of the film, not just from where I think the music actually is so perfect. I talked to a composer once who said the greatest compliment is when you actually don't notice the score.
Right.
And I feel like that last section around the time of Desi's death,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that part is so. I went back and watched it twice because take me through that section because I feel that's such a crucial section of the film.
Your memory may be better than mine. I haven't watched it recently, but yeah, it just felt like, the total low point, but also, how's the way to say it? It was the truth of their relationship that when it came down, they were all married to other people at this time and fairly successful second marriages for both of them and people who loved them and they loved. And now in his last minute, he's reaching out to Lucy, or certainly Lucy's daughter, Lucy Jr., is, and it's very poignant. So I didn't want it to be over the top. I think that was an area where I went for a little more subtlety, and there was beauty in it too. So I wanted to have it be achingly beautiful and sad, but not so sad that it's always a fine line with even when you're doing a comedy, how funny can this be, or how edgy can this be? And so I feel that one of the biggest jobs I do is I usually write it very fast. An idea comes out and I try to get to the end. It might be just one line of the melody or just something that takes me through the whole scene. And then I start to go back and saying, oh, well, I might even finish the orchestration and all that. And then I might go back and say, yeah, but this was not the intent. This is not what I wanted for this scene. So sometimes you can write great music and it doesn't fit. So that's when you re-examine. But for me, and I guess a lot of people too, going with the inspiration, I don't like to stop after 2 bars and start editing. Not that I haven't done, I think we all have. But if I can get through it, I learned this the first time I did an orchestra, and my friend Phil Giffen was my conductor and orchestrator. And he said, just go with that. Let's take it to the end of the 2.5-minute piece, and then we can go into editorial or critical mode. And that really helps me because I can really move that way, and then look at it later and fix what needs to be fixed, or sometimes throw it out or change it. But
I'm curious. I always ask composers this: has the advent of technology, coupled with the way things have happened since the pandemic, has it changed the way that you work?
Yes and no. It's always been a solitary field. It's always me and Matt's over there. Say hi, Matt. He's not going to say hi. He's too shy. It's usually me and one other person who works here. A lot of the times I'll work nights and weekends and it's just me. And after college, I was a photographer and I found myself in a dark room by myself. So I went back into social music and started to play with bands and do recordings. But in the end, you end up in a dark room by yourself. But you can see this room has a lot of light though. So that was a more recent innovation in this studio. So go tell me the original question again, because I feel I'm
well,
really
how has
particularly
the technology coupled with the fact that the pandemic has really isolated everybody,
right.
Has that changed the way, not just the way that you work, but also the way that these scores get recorded?
Yes, in big ways. Doing Rutherford Falls, the first 2 seasons of it, I worked with a lot of those same people on The Good Place, and we had wonderful meetings. It meant I had to drive somewhere between 30 minutes and 2 hours, depending on the traffic, to Universal. Nobody likes that. But it's great perspective to get out of your studio and sit in the same room with the people who are, commissioning the music and have the strongest opinions on it and create the show. So I love to do that, and I love to get their opinions. I'm also, I think, in the minority of composers who, if any way I can, I go to the stage on the final mix. And mostly shut up, but sometimes I feel I can add to something. And it might even be something like, oh, the color timing doesn't seem right there. And then everyone looks at me like the musician's crazy. But because they're also used to, everyone can criticize music, but if I make a note on something visual, which is where I come from, a more visual background, it's funny. But and sometimes I'll say, I think the music's too loud in this scene. And sometimes I'll say, we're losing it here, you're not going to hear it. But I basically don't talk. I just like to be there and see, how a Mitch Hurwitz or a Mike Scher is reacting to my music. And the two of them couldn't be more different. So, and yet have similarities in their greatness. And then all the sessions I did during that period were remote. And Rutherford Falls, mostly my guitarist, George Deering, who any composer who's ever used him said, this guy saves our lives every single episode, every single note. He's so great. And he has an incredible studio in his home in the Valley. And I didn't realize, like, when we started using Listen to software, he had to engineer, and he's a better engineer than anybody. He could engineer himself, and he'd just deliver finished tracks. In some ways, it was time saving. But that thing of where, people are, sometimes we'd have Zoom meetings where they reviewed music, but usually they would review it themselves and come back to it. And I like to be there to say, like, oh yeah, I get why you didn't like this, and this is a simple change. We'll just take the clarinet out, rather than going back and forth 3 or 4 times. So I guess there's some silver linings about it. And, it made me do a lot more music by myself. The first 6 months I didn't have any work until Rutherford Falls started up. And I made my own album with a friend. So, and we're still finishing it now, almost 3 years later, but it came out great, and it's something I don't think I would have done. I started sending him tracks, just thinking he'd add guitar, because he's an unbelievable guitarist. Instead, he'd send me a full song every night. So that went on for 13 nights. I'd finish a track and he'd send me a song. There were probably days that we didn't send me a song, but it was kind of incredible. And now we have, I think in the final record, it's 11 songs. So does that answer it?
Yeah.
Kind of a lot of answers.
Is there a difference to you between, say, like, scores that are played? I've talked to composers where literally they'll send this string part to this one person, and this one person will play at home and basically double themselves, and then all those elements come together in the final mix, versus having 10 to 30 musicians playing a score in one spot. Is there something? Do you have a preference? Do you hear something different?
I greatly prefer method 2. Everyone in the room. This we had 36 string players in the room. The saxophone player was sick, so he did all the woodwinds for that Latin stuff and a couple of other woodwinds, and he had to do them at home. He didn't have COVID, it turned out. So that's just thrilling. I think anyone, even when producers come to a scoring session, they can't believe it, because it's almost always done on the first take. And you'll just hear them going like, God, if we could do that on the set, we do all these takes. Not that actors aren't great, they certainly are, but it's something about the level of musicianship, particularly in this town. It's thrilling. And, it's always scary because it doesn't take much to make it all go wrong. I planned 7 hours, which would have been way more expensive. And my conductor, who's also my orchestrator, said to me, Lucas Richmond, said, no, we'll have it done in 4. And I kind of didn't believe him. And at 4 o'clock, like almost on the dot, he turns to me and says, we got it. And like everything was done on every stand. And I was looking, well, we must have missed something, but we didn't. And that's really a miracle to be done that fast. And it was great. And of those 36 players, I think everyone had worked with me in smaller sections, in quartets and whatever, in my studio. And any one of them is capable of being the concertmaster. They're such, like, we got lucky that day. So I looked into the room and saw, oh, we got him and her and her and her. And it was just amazing. And I think everyone was glad to be together and do a session. It happened to luck out that it was a time when COVID was at a very minimal risk. And so that's great.
Well, you do all that and get an Emmy nomination for it.
Well, that's a bonus. It's beautiful.
David, congratulations. Beautiful, beautiful work. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the Emmys, and stay tuned for interviews with more nominees throughout the coming weeks. David Schwartz, congratulations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony. This was really fun. Hope we get to meet.